If you're returning to Warframe and you're wondering where to pick up, what has changed, and which things you should focus on right now, then this video is for you. In today's guide, I'm gonna give you a complete Warframe progression rundown, meaning no matter if you've just missed the last update or you came back after many years, we're gonna identify the exact point where you currently are and then go over what to focus on next. Big shout out to all our generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on, and now, let's jump right into it. Okay, now, before we jump into the first chapter, I quickly gotta take a minute to explain to you in which way this video is structured, because otherwise I think it might be a little bit overwhelming. So please bear with me for a minute. First and foremost, Warframe is a gigantic game, and it is naturally impossible for me personally to know what your precise account status is. That is why this video is subdivided into multiple chapters according to the major progression milestones in the Warframe story. For each and every one of those chapters, at the beginning, we're going to go over where exactly in the story this is, so you can compare it to your own story progress to find out whether this chapter is for you or you have to go to another one. In order to find out where you are currently in the story, just walk over to this console in your orbiter right here. This is the codex, and in the quest tab, the game will show you which quests you've already finished and which ones are still unknown. This way, it'll be easy for you to figure out where in the video you need to start. Once you then found the right chapter, the first thing we're going to talk about is which other story steps we need to take in order to progress to the next chapter, and then in the second half, we're going to go over which game mechanics, which types of progression, and in general, which content is the most important one in this part of the game, and in which order you should focus on those things, including stuff like weapon recommendations, upgrades that are very strong, which things to rather skip, and much more. Of course, this is going to be quite ambitious, and naturally I cannot cover every single minuscule detail in this video alone, so throughout this video I'm probably going to link to multiple of my other guides that focus on specific mechanics in detail. In case you want to learn more about that, all the links that I'm going to talk about in this video are in the video description down below. And lastly, because we're going to talk about pretty much the entire story of the game here, there will naturally be minor spoilers. However, I'm going to make sure that all the scenes that you're seeing in the background will be given without any story context, so I'm not going to give away any major plot points or twists so you can experience them for yourself. And last but not least, if you think there are more tips that should be in this video but I didn't talk about, then you're more than welcome to leave them in the comments down below. And with all that being said, let's jump right into the first chapter. Okay, chapter number 1. I'm gonna call this Before the War Within, or in other words, this one is more of the early game part of Warframe. If you return to Warframe and you haven't finished the quest The War Within just yet, then this here is the right chapter for you, although I gotta say I don't want to go into all that much detail on this early part of the game, because there are many beginner guides out there, I even have some of them myself, that focus specifically on starting the game and the very early game, so if you haven't finished the star map already, then I would definitely recommend searching for some Warframe beginner guides as well and giving them a try. But now that you're already here, let's quickly also go over the main points of what I personally would recommend you to do in this early part of the game. Before you finish The War Within, your first and highest priority should be finishing the star map, unlocking every single planet, and making your way through the origin system. You don't have to fully 100% every single planet right away, but if you are a completionist and this is fun to you, then I'm not trying to convince you otherwise, because sooner or later you're gonna have to finish all those missions anyway. As you progress planet by planet, there will be certain story quests that you have to finish in order to make certain planetary jumps, but don't worry, the game is gonna tell you which ones these are, and then you just do them as the game says so. If you want to have some suggestions on what to tackle next, there's also this little window right here in your star map screen where the game itself gives you some hints on what to focus on. But alright, so much for the story progression. Before you finish The War Within, just continue doing the star chart until you get to the point where you can start The War Within, and then do that because this would conclude the first major plot arc of Warframe. As for game mechanics and upgrade systems that you should focus on, I would say there hasn't been all that much that changed since whenever you left the game, because other than quality of life improvements that make the early game smoother, the major mechanics like crafting weapons and warframes as well as modding them and all that stuff, that is still relatively the same as it was 10 years ago. However, one thing that I might want to mention is this console right here. This is called the Nightwave, and this is kind of a free season pass that every player gets to have by default, where you can unlock quite some nice stuff like more inventory slots for weapons and warframes, as well as valuable mods and upgrades. Even as a Warframe beginner, I would always recommend that you take a look at those weekly missions every week and see which one of these you might be able to do already, and then trying to do them as you progress to the star chart to get at least a little bit of progress in the Nightwave and snipe one or two of these juicy upgrades. As for which weapons I personally would recommend, this one is pretty simple and it's also still the same as it was years ago. Once you're Mastery Rank 4, there is a shotgun called the Heck, which is pretty good. And then once you are at Mastery Rank 6, you gain access to the Soma automatic rifle, which is a very strong crit weapon and can easily take down enemies even up to level 100, which is way past just the normal star chart. These two, in my opinion, are the best beginner weapons in the game, and even though they are very old by now, I can still wholeheartedly recommend them. However, if you still find yourself in this early part of the game and you still feel overwhelmed by all the things that the game throws at you, then I would recommend maybe taking a look at my beginner guides playlist, where I have in-detail explanations on how modding works, how to upgrade your weapons on warframes, how to get new ones, and in general, which details best to focus on in the very early game. And as always, if you could maybe drop the video a like, that would be very nice because it helps big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. But alright, so much for the early game. If you continue progressing through the star chart, then at some point you're gonna have the War Within quest done, which would then lead you into this chapter right here. If you take a look at your quest progression and it says that the War Within is done, but the quest called The New War isn't done yet, then this chapter right now is the right one for you. See, the War Within is the conclusion of Warframe's first big story arc, and everything leading up to the New War, as well as the New War itself, would then be this second arc. So let's first talk about which quests are included in this arc and in which order you have to finish them to get through it till the next one. First and foremost, once you've finished the War Within, you will gain an item called the Personal Quarter segment. This is something that you can craft in the Foundry, and once it is done, you gain access to this room right here in the Orbiter. While this segment is still in the making, one quest that you gotta do is Chains of Harrow, which is a very nice one. However, if you are easily scared, I would personally recommend maybe not playing it in the middle of the night while you're alone at home. But once you have access to the crew quarters and Chains of Harrow is done, you will see that there is a purple orb glowing in the personal quarters. Go over there, touch it, and that will then lead you to a quest called the Apostasy Prologue, which doesn't offer all that much gameplay and is more like an interactive cutscene setting up the plot for the new war. After you're done with that, you get back to the crew quarters, where you will find the Lotus Helmet in the entry area, which you also gotta touch. And after that, you're gonna do the story quest called The Sacrifice, which is very nice as well, followed by a more narrative story beat called Prelude to War, which consists of the Chimera Prologue, Era, and the Maker. Once you completed all of these, you should have the New War quest unlocked, and that then would be your next big milestone to finish. However, don't rush it, because this is a gigantic 3 to 5 hour long cinematic AAA story experience that, once started, you cannot get out of anymore. So you want to be prepared, and this is kind of the main thing that this whole mid-game section is about. Setting up your weapons and warframes, gaining strength, and preparing for what is to come in the new war, which is exactly what we're going to talk about next. See, after you finish the War Within, the end quest of the previous chapter, you unlock a whole lot of new progression mechanics, and unfortunately I don't have the time in this video right here to go over every single one of them. However, here are the most important ones. The first thing that I would personally focus on after finishing the War Within is leveling up your open worlds. Earth, Venus, and Deimos, the 3 open worlds that you already did the intro quests of as part of your star chart experience. Now would be the point where you can spend some more time in those open worlds, do the open world bounties to gain standing with the syndicates there, and level up your rank with them. In my personal opinion, the Plains of Eidolon on Earth, as well as the Cambion Drift on Deimos, are the 2 more important ones to focus on here, while Fortuna on Venus is definitely not unimportant, but the things that you can get out of it are not as important as the things that you gain access to by doing the other 2. The next thing you want to focus on right now is getting your first full weapon build and full Warframe build done. See, until this point, I think it was probably enough to just throw 4 or 5 mods onto your weapon, and that would be more than enough. However, going forward, especially with the new war, you wanna have the first build, which means you're gonna need Orokin reactors and Orokin catalysts to maximize the mod capacity of your frame and weapon, as well as Forma to polarize the mod slot so that you can fit more onto it. Again, if you've never heard about these mechanics, no problem, check out my beginner guides playlist where you will find an easy to understand in-detail explanation on how this whole modding system works. This right here would be an example of a standard cookie cutter build for a weapon like, for example, the Soma, and it will give you the strength that you need to progress further into the story. One thing I do want to talk about at this point would be galvanized mods, and I apologize in advance because this might be a little bit of a tangent right now. See, galvanized mods are a class of mods that are extremely strong. Pretty much every late-game weapon build in Warframe consists of one or maybe even multiple galvanized mods because they are just that essential in giving you the power that you need for higher level enemies. The problem with this is that the only way to gain access to the galvanized mods is through a game mode called Arbitrations, and the game mode Arbitrations, you can only unlock that as soon as you finished every single mission on the star chart, including those that will only appear after you've finished every single story quest, even those that are beyond the new war. So technically, when you are at this point right now, before the new war, you won't be able to unlock the arbitrations and therefore you won't have access to galvanized mods. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Because when the galvanized mods were first introduced into the game, the mission The War Within, aka the conclusion of chapter 1 of this video, at that point was the end of the story, meaning when you were done with it, you had every mission done in the game and therefore you had access to arbitrations. Now, however, since the game has grown, this is no longer the case. So, in other words, players that were around like 3 years ago or something could have galvanized mods at the point where you are right now, but you right now cannot do that anymore. Because of that, I would personally recommend that you just go out and buy some galvanized mods from other players before moving on. They are all in all really not that expensive, and you can easily farm that little bit of platinum that you need in order to buy those by just crack opening a handful of relic and selling whatever prime part you find in it. I know this might feel like cheating, buying something that you don't legitimately have access to just yet. However, 3 years ago, people would have access to it just now. So to me, I would say it's just fair. But don't worry, if trading for platinum does not sound like your cup of tea, we're gonna get back to the galvanized mods later in this video once you would legitimately unlock them. Alright, rant over, let's go on with what is really important to even be able to play the new war quest, and that would be that you need to own both a railjack as well as a necromech. Railjacks are spacecraft that you can man together with your friends and play them in their whole own game mode, as well as necromechs who are, as the name says, basically gigantic mechs that you can also use in specific game modes. The new war quest includes sections where you have to use both a railjack as well as a necromech, so you cannot start the quest before you own both of that. So let's go over how to do that. First off, the railjack is being acquired by playing the quest called Rising Tide. I think at this point you should have access to it and you can just start it from the codex. As for the necromech, this is one of the reasons why you want to progress with your open worlds a bit more, because crafting your own necromech is what you can do on Deimos in the Necrolord room right here, where you can construct your own necromech from pieces of broken necromechs, which you can either obtain by doing isolation balls in the Cambion Drift, or you can also get them when you talk to Father right here. Now, I'm gonna be honest here, I would really love to explain the whole Isolation Vault game modes with all its bells and whistles to you right now, but it would absolutely overbloat the video, and unfortunately I don't have a separate guide on this just yet, so if you want to know more about those, I would just recommend you a YouTube search and you're surely gonna find one of my creator colleagues who has talked in great detail about this. However, once you're done with the necromech and you have finished the Rising Tide quest and also own a railjack, the next question would be, how much should you invest into them? How many upgrades do they need in order to be able to finish the new war quest without just breaking apart halfway? The necromech part itself in the quest is going to be very short, at max 10 minutes, and it's also not really difficult. Just throw in one health mod, one armor mod, and you're going to be fine. As for the railjack, The railjack parts in the quest are going to be a bit bigger than the necromech ones, and theoretically it is also possible to get through them with a completely vanilla, unupgraded railjack, but over the last 2 years or so, I've read a lot of comments of people saying that they unfortunately soft-locked themselves in this quest because they hadn't upgraded their railjack enough, and as I said a minute ago, you cannot get out of this quest once you started it. So I would say better be safe than sorry and invest a little bit into your railjack, where my personal recommendations would be as follows. For the intrinsics, you can keep the tactical tree at 0, I don't think it's all too important for the quest. Piloting, go to 3, gunnery 1, engineering 4, and in command you want to invest a little bit more and get it up to level 5. The reason for that is that it gives you access to NPC crew members who can fulfill multiple roles in your railjack. In my opinion, the best thing you can do here is go to Fortuna and get 2 crew members who have a focus on gunnery, a high gunnery skill, to man your side turrets of the railjack, and then if you want to go for a 3rd NPC crew member, take an engineer that can automatically repair damages to the railjack without you having to get out of the cockpit. Trust me, it's really going to make things a lot easier. As for the railjack upgrades itself, just throw on some more health and armor, just like with the necromech, and use whatever the highest guns are that you have currently unlocked. Should be more than enough for the quest then. But alright, now that you have the railjack and you have the necromech, the next thing we need to talk about would be the helmet system. See, the helmet system is something that you can access in this room right here in your orbiter that you probably already know from removing the cysts from your Warframe's neck. This chair though can be used for much more. See, if you have enough standing with the Entirety family on Deimos, then you can gain access to various helmet modules for your orbiter. Once you've constructed these, you can use this helmet chair to sacrifice Warframes that you don't need anymore to then gain one of their abilities and infuse this ability onto other Warframes. Now, to be fair, this whole mechanic is relatively late game and you shouldn't focus all too much on it just yet, it's also very resource intensive, but especially later on in the game, this will become essential for the strongest builds out there, so why not unlock it when you're already in the process to gain standing on Deimos? Now, I know this was a lot, but unfortunately we are still not done yet. As I said, this quote-unquote mid-game section of Warframe is very long because it has so many different mechanics, so believe me, there is no rush, take the time that you need. In case you want to replace your early game weapons with something that is a bit more powerful, I would recommend this video right here, which shows the, in my opinion, best mid-game weapons in Warframe. It is a bit older already, but it's still relevant because there hasn't been all that much change when it comes to mid-game firearms. However, there is one more big progression mechanic that you gain access to when you're done with the War Within, the final quest of Chapter 1, and that would be Arcanes. Arcanes in Warframe kind of work like mods in that you can put them on your Warframes, on your weapons, on pretty much anything by now. And if you have the right ones, then they too will give you much more power. Once you're done with the new war, you will have access to your operator mode. With that operator, you can now go out on the plains of Eidolon on Earth at night and fight those big creatures called Eidolons. These are boss fights that are ideally done with a squad that knows what they're doing, and the whole mechanics surrounding your operator and how to fight Eidolons and all that stuff is a huge topic, and unfortunately also here I haven't gotten to talk about it in more detail on this channel. So all I'm gonna say about that at this point in the video is, you can go and try it out for yourself, see if you like it. If yes, then feel free to do as much Eidolon hunting as you like. However, if you feel like it's a bit much for you right now, Arcanes aren't a necessity yet and you can safely skip them for the time being. Just one recommendation from my side, if you want to have an in-detail guide on how Eidolon hunts work and how to upgrade your operator amp, which is the weapon that your operator has, you will find some excellent guides on this on WarframeFlo's channel. I'm gonna put you the links to those videos in the description as well. As for how to level up your operator themselves, again, it is a big topic. This time though, I actually have a video about it myself, and you will also find it in the description down below. However, just note that when you want to progress further through the story, it isn't as necessary to fully invest in your operator just yet. Whew, so much for the mid-game. That was quite a lot, so let's summarize that real quick in one sentence. In order to quote-unquote finish this mid-game chapter, you have to do the storyline that I went through at the beginning of this chapter, and then farm a necromech and a railjack in order to be able to even start the new war quest. On the way there are tons and tons of upgrade mechanics that I just went over in this chapter, and from what I said, just decide which ones of these are important to you personally and which ones you would rather focus on later, which would then lead you to the big quest, the New War, after which you successfully enter the next chapter of this video. So let's go over that right now. Alright, chapter number 3. Don't worry, this one is not going to be as massive as chapter 2. You are in this chapter if you have the quest The New War finished, however, you aren't done with the quest Whispers in the Wall just yet. In this case, this chapter right here is for you. As always, let's first talk about the story progression throughout this chapter, where this is actually relatively short. What you gotta do after the New War to get to Whispers in the Walls is the story quest Angels of the Zariman, which you should have unlocked right after the New War, the story quest The Duviri Paradox, which should also already be unlocked by now, and once you're done with both of these, you can already start Whispers in the Walls. As for the relevant game and upgrade mechanics in this chapter, the first thing that I would recommend to anyone after finishing the New War is doing the Angels of the Zariman quest right away, because that will give you access to the Zariman 10-0 on the star chart, as well as to the Holdfast Syndicate, where you can unlock multiple upgrades. One of these upgrades would be a new weapon class called Incarnon Weapons, and still, to this point, Incarnon Weapons are the objectively best and strongest type of weapon in the entirety of Warframe. Once you're done with the Angels of the Zariman quest, and you have ranked up a bit with the Holdfast Syndicate, you will gain access to the 4 original Incarnon weapons called the Fenmore, the Felarks, the Ladum, as well as the Praedos, the blueprints for which you can obtain from a character called Cavallero. Now, I'm gonna make it short, all these 4 Incarnon weapons are extremely strong and you're never gonna regret investing into any of those, but I personally would recommend going for the Fenmore because it is kind of the best assault rifle in the entirety of Warframe. I even have a full video on just the Fenmore alone because it is such an exceptionally great rifle that I would wholeheartedly recommend it to every single player out there. It is that good and the first new power spike that you should focus on in this chapter of the video. However, that's not all. After finishing the Veilbreaker quest, which can be started after the New War, you're also going to gain access to a new game mode called Archon Hunt. This is a series of 3 missions, at the end of which you are guaranteed to gain an item called Archon Shard. Archon Shards are the next big type of progression mechanic for your weapons and warframes, and unlike mods and arcanes that we've used before, Archon Shards are not tradable between players, meaning the only way to gain access to them is if you actually go and farm them yourself. So I say once you unlock them, try to get them as often as possible. As for how to be able to use those Archon Shards, you first have to gain a new segment for your helmet system called the Archon Shard segment, which will be rewarded once you finish the Veilbreaker quest, so that is something that I would highly recommend you do. And then you will be able to take your Archon Shards, put them on your favorite warframes to give you further increases in stats and power in general. Another nice power spike that you could focus on right now would be dipping your toes a bit further into arcanes. With the Zariman 10-0, we do get access to a new set of arcanes, for which you don't have to do all the Eidolon hunting, and there are quite a couple nice ones in here. Just by the way, if you want to have an overview on all the important and strong arcanes that are currently available in the game, I have a full arcane guide on my channel already, link as always in the description, where you can get an overview of which ones are worth going for, which ones are not so great, and in general, how to best farm all of them. The next big topic that we need to talk about in this chapter would be Duviri. Remember when we were talking about the story progress, the quest The Duviri Paradox was one of the things that you need to do? Well, I would recommend that you do this quest after you finish the Angels of Zariman quest and have done the Zariman 10-0 stuff that we just talked about. The thing with Duviri though is that Duviri kind of feels like an entirely separate game that is only very loosely connected to the base Warframe that we know. I don't want to go into all that much detail on what exactly Duviri is and how it works just yet. However, just note that in order to get more of those extremely powerful Incarnon weapons, you will have to finish the Duviri quest to gain access to a game mode called the Circuit, where on a weekly rotation, you can gain access to more of those Incarnon weapons. But if you rather play the story first and get back to it later, it's also no problem. In this case, just finish the Duviri Paradox quest and then leave Duviri alone for a while. Just by the way, if you want to know more about Deviri, I have a whole 30-minute long guide about absolutely everything in Deviri, all the mechanics, all the upgrades, all the progression, what you can expect there. Link also in the description. Once you feel it's time to get to Deviri, this one might be a nice guidance. And finally, once you're done with the Zariman 10.0 and with the Deviri quest, you will have access to the Whispers in the Walls quest, which at the point of writing is the latest big story quest in Warframe and would introduce the final chapter of the video about which we're going to talk right now. Whew, we made it! Final chapter of the video. Yeah, welcome back to the game after leaving for 3 weeks or what. Cannot be that long, right? Well, let's talk about it. Once you've finished the Whispers in the Walls quest, in terms of story progression, there isn't really coming a lot after Whispers in the Wall. The only thing that you need to do now would be the mini-quest Lotus Eaters, which isn't so much of a quest as more of a cutscene. Really, it's 5 minutes and then it's done. Once this Lotus Eaters quest is finished, you will have the entire storyline of Warframe completed until this point, and you will be ready to jump into the big Warframe 1999 update as soon as that one gets live in a couple of days. As for which progression you can focus on, now, in case you haven't already, you should really focus on 100%ing the entire star chart, doing every single mission node, because at this point you will have unlocked them all, which also means that now would finally be the point where you can unlock this arbitration game mode that I talked about earlier in the video, out of which you now would be legitimately able to finally get the galvanized mods if you haven't bought them from other players earlier. Also, another game mode that you unlock once you finish every single mission would be the Steel Path, which is kind of like a new game plus, where you can play the entire star chart again and every enemy is 100 levels stronger and much tougher in general. This also would be a nice challenge to focus on, especially because in Steel Path certain game modes give much better rewards. For example, this Deviri circuit that I talked about in the last chapter. If you want to get those new Incarnon weapons out of it, you need to play it in the Steel Path difficulty, so 100%ing the star chart, unlocking the arbitrations as well as the Steel Path should be your top priority right now if you haven't done so already. Once you've finished every mission node on the star chart, in order to get into the Steel Path, you have to go to a relay and talk to Teshin and ask him about the Steel Path, after which you will find a little slider in your star chart right here, where you can switch between normal and Steel Path difficulty. The next mechanic that you really want to get deeper into right now would be arcanes if you haven't done so already, because now you can really go all into it, getting every single arcane in the game that you want much easier than before. Here's how that works. See, in the Sanctum Anatomica hub world, to which you will gain access after the Whispers in the Wall quest, you can talk to Lloyd right here and melt down arcanes that you already have to gain a resource called Phosphor. This Phosphor then can be used to purchase arcane packs, which will include all types of arcanes that can be farmed in the game without you having to actually go and farm those arcanes. So for example, if you, much like me, do not like doing Eidolons, then now you have the opportunity to get all those Eidolon arcanes without ever having seen an Eidolon in real life. The best way to get a lot of this Phosphor resource that you need for the arcanes would be either to purchase it from your syndicates in your orbiter, they do sell Phosphor packs, or simply by melting down the arcanes that you have and don't need anymore. By the way, the Steel Path version of the Void Cascade game mode on the Zariman 10.0 is the most profitable game mode in terms of arcane drops, so if you want to farm arcanes, try to farm this one. You will get a lot of arcane drops out of it, which you can then turn into Phosphor to get those arcane packs that you really want. And finally, and probably most importantly, remember how we talked about Archon shards? You know, those colorful crystals which you can put on your Warframe for even better stats and improvements? Well, after Whispers in the Walls, Warframe also cranks this mechanic up to 11 with much more depth that you have now access to. First of all, while previously you could do 1 Archon hunt per week, which would guarantee you 1 Archon shard per week, now you can get much more by doing a game mode called Netracells, as well as another game mode called Deep Archimedia, out of which you can get many more Archon shards. Also, once per week, you can talk to Bird 3 right here to get another guaranteed Archon shard just for 30,000 standing, and we also gain access to 3 new Archon shards, those being the purple, orange, and green ones. Now, about what those Archon shards do and all, I have already made a video about that last week. However, in order to be able to gain access to those new Archon shard mechanics, you will again need some more segments for your orbiter. Those being first, the Helmet Coalescent segment, which you can also purchase from Bird 3 for standing, as well as if you want to use arcanes on your melee weapons, you will get the melee upgrade segment automatically after finishing the Whispers in the Walls quest. If you follow this progression guide, then the next big thing for you will be Warframe 1999. And of course, we're gonna discuss it in great detail here on this channel once it comes out. So if you don't want to miss out on that, day one, then you might want to consider maybe leaving the channel a sub. Welcome to the crew. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nos Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lycon Shepherd, Underconio2, Pepperwolf, Streamjet21, SignUpKing 5000, Mihawk HE, Yagis, Hoke Hunter, Noob Phoenix, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.